Hi everyone and welcome to the sew-along for the base hoodie. There are multiple options with this hoodie, so just mix and match and choose which ones suit you best. I'll try and explain them the most I can during the course of this video. Of course, just skip over the parts you don't need. So the first thing I need to say is this is a knit garment, so our seams are patterned with a 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you're ready, set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric and set the stitch width to 6mm 1/4 inch. When we overlock, we're going to sew the raw edges together so there's no need to cut anything off. So you are going to need a way of completing your hems. You could put a twin needle in a domestic sewing machine, or you could use a cover stitch machine. Just do whatever suits you best, but just don't forget to test stitch on spare fabric before you begin, and any needles you use in your fabric need to be ball needles. Alright, so let's jump straight in and do the pocket. Here is our pocket piece. Go to your overlocker and secure the raw edge, then turn at the notch points, which is the centre of these triangle bits, and that's 2.5 centimetres, which is 1 inch, and then stitch through the overlocking line. So this is going to create our hand opening, and then do another line of stitching parallel to the first. And repeat that on the other side. Now go to your iron and press the remaining seams under by 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so apologies, I've just managed to lose the video of the pocket attachment, so I'm going to redo it on this fabric here to show you what we're going to do. So, when you cut out your front, you will have marked your drill holes, and I've pinned them here with pin heads. So these show us the placement of the pocket, so they're on both sides. So when you're ready, take your pocket that you've now pressed with those 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowances, and we're going to guess a point the same distance in from the corner. So measure or guess 1 in and 1 down, 3/8 of an inch. Put a pin on that spot, and that spot goes directly on top of our drill holes, and place that on like so. And do this for each of the drill hole positions. On your folded piece here, guesstimate a point 3/8 of an inch in and down from the corner, and then place that on top of the drill holes. So this is just the same as doing any other patch pocket. Now, because markings can move around when you are doing this, the main thing is we want our pocket to be parallel, so we want it to sit right this way horizontally, but don't get too concerned about the exact position of those drill holes. As long as we've covered it, it's more important that the pocket sits flat. So when you've done all 6 of those positionings and you're comfortable that everything's in the correct place, we're going to sew the pocket down. So we need to sew on the top edge, making sure everything's nice and flat. Edge stitch it from this corner here to the other corner, and then if you want to, and it's always a good idea, complete a 2nd row of top stitching there. Now for the sides, we're going to start here. You want to come down this edge here, stop with your needle in your work, lift, turn and pivot, and go across to the other side and back up to the same position on the other side. And then if you are going to do a top stitch as well, do that. So the main thing to remember is the seam that we've already sewed down is our hand opening, so make sure you leave these angled parts free. So this is what you're looking for with the pocket, and we need to make sure we can put our hand in here. Okay, so I'm now going to sew the funnel neck hood. If you need instructions for the crossover hood, go onto my YouTube channel and look for the perfect pleat hoodie, because the construction is exactly the same for that as it is for this garment, but I'll do the version with the funnel hood. So in the centre of the funnel you'll have 2 drill holes, and I've marked them here with pins. Just take those out. So if you are going to put grommets in, now's the time to pop the grommets on the main fabric, so that's the outer fabric. If you're going to stitch eyelets, you can do exactly the same thing, but what I'm going to do is stitch buttonholes in for my opening. Now you might need to put some reinforcing underneath your fabric depending on the fabric you use, but just make sure you centre your buttonholes on those drill marks, and also make sure they're parallel, or as near enough to parallel as you can get to that raw edge. So that's just a matter of when you set this up, just set it up so that your buttonhole foot is near enough in a parallel line to the side. You're not going to get it perfect because it's clearly it's a curve, but as long as you get it near enough, that should be fine. So just whenever you're ready, just stitch a buttonhole in. And don't forget to stitch in the other one, and also don't forget to snip them when you're finished. So when you're ready, go to your overlocker and place the main hood right sides together. We want to overlock this long curved edge, making sure that we match the double notches as we go. Now take your hood lining and do exactly the same thing. So now what we want to do is right sides together place our hood and our hood lining. So I'm just going to rearrange my work. I'm going to turn my hood main right side out and then put the hood lining on top. So just place it in the centre, and then I'm going to match the seams we just sewed, which is the centre back. So this is the next seam we're going to sew, is the seam closest to the buttonholes. And as we go around there are notches to match, just to make sure that everything stretches into the same position. And don't start directly on a seam line or at the centre front, just start maybe to one side or another of the centre back, but it's entirely up to you. When you do pass over that seam, make sure your overlocking is facing in different directions, and that'll just help with any bulk. Okay, so turn this so that wrong sides are together. And then it's a good idea to go to your iron and give it a press. So you want to press it so that the fold is directly on the edge, and just to settle those stitches into place. Right, so now once this is pressed, we need to stitch in a channel for our drawstring to go through. It doesn't really matter what width you stitch it, as long as the distance between the edge and your grommet or buttonhole is the same. If you stitched it the same on the other side, it would be really good. Have a good think about the colours you're going to use for your thread. I've got quite a dark colour underneath and the peachy colour on top, so I'm going to put a peach colour on top and a grey thread underneath. That is up to you. Just make sure that it's not going to be too obvious. And also, starting and finishing off of your seam, you need to have a really good think about where you're going to do that from as well, so it's not so obvious. It might be quite obvious in the centre back of the hood, but maybe somewhere down the side seam might not be too bad. Anyway, so make a decision. I'm going to sew this 2 centimetres, which is what? I think it's 9/16 of an inch. I can't remember. Hang on. 2 centimetres is 3/4 of an inch. That's right. Please forgive me. So partway down the side, I'm just going to position this on my 2 centimetre line and start sewing. Now this is not essential, but I always find it easier to tack stitch my hood pieces together. I'm just going to run a very small line of stitching just in from the edge of my fabric on the raw edges, and I'm just going to match the notches as I go. It just makes life so much easier when you go in to put the hood into the neckline. Now before you go any further, if you have changed your bobbin colour, make sure you change it back. So let's sew the drawcord now. You could of course bi-cording if you want. I'm going to sew my easiest method of doing that, so I'm just going to run a tail, which is maybe a foot out there, and then I'm going to start overlocking. What I'm going to do is bring that tail through the centre of my drawcord. I mean, you can use a loop turner if you want, but this is just so easy doing it this way. And I'm going to start overlocking those long raw edges, just making sure I don't catch that overlocking tail. Okay, so what I'm going to do is use this to turn it through. So I'm just going to pull and come to the end here, and then just help it on its way to feed through. I'm just going to pass this through. Once you get the first little bit turned, the rest is so easy to do. So now I'm just going to continue overlocking. Okay, so I was just gently feeding some of this through as I went. So all I'm going to do now is pull the rest of this through. As I said, you can use a loop turner if you want. It's entirely up to you. I just find this really fast and quick. Now, I've given you a pattern piece for this Drawcord. It will stretch slightly if your fabric's got horizontal stretch. Horizontal, vertical stretch, of course. It will stretch slightly. You can, of course, just cut this to the length length that suits you. Sorry, I've still got my cold, and obviously I'm a bit tongue-tied at the moment. So if you want to, go ahead and thread it through your hood now, or you can leave it till the very end. Okay, so I've threaded that through my hood. You can tie these off any way you like, put end caps on them. What I like to do is just put a little knot on them and just tidy up the end a little bit, or you could roll the knot right down to the end. Now these aren't exceptionally long cords, I just quite liked the look of the shorter length. You can of course lengthen that pattern piece to suit. So now we're moving on to the ways you can complete the sleeves, and we'll start with the sleeve finishes. You can sew a cuff, you can sew a band with elastic in it, or you can just do a regular sleeve hem. A regular sleeve hem I won't even worry about, because that is literally just a matter of turning up the hem at 1 inch, which is 2.5 centimeters, and securing it with stitching. The elastic waistband, I've put written instructions with photos in the tutorial. That is literally the same as doing a cuff, but you just pop the elastic in it and then you put it on. So this garment here, I'm going to sew the cuff sleeve finish. So take your cuff piece, and at one edge you'll see a notch top and bottom. Fold that so the notch is on the fold, and then we're going to overlock secure the edge that does not have a notch in it. And then put your hand in it and turn it half so that we have wrong sides together. And just tidy up the way it looks a little bit until our cuff is all there ready to go, and just repeat on the other cuff. So now we're going to sew the sleeve with all the inserts in it. Of course, if you're sewing the plain sleeve, you can just skip over this. So this sleeve has got 5 parts. The upper sleeve, insert 1, 2 and 3, and the lower sleeve. Now if you get these 3 inserts mixed up, just remember the main colour is in the middle, and it goes in descending order. So the longest ones are at the top and the shortest ones are at the bottom. So it's a good idea to lay them out somewhere like this. What we're going to do is sew the upper sleeve to 1, to 2, to 3, to the lower sleeve. Confused? It's not that bad. The pieces are a mirror, so they're cut on the the pieces are cut on the fold, so they're exactly the same. We can do that because it's a drop shoulder. Take your upper piece, place it right side up. Take insert 1, place it so that we have right sides together, and we want it to be like this. So overlock across, and there's a notch to match in the center. Now it's important that you sew these and you cut these in a straight line. Now open that up so it's right side up. Take insert 2 and sew insert 2 there. Open it up and sew insert 3. Open it up, take your lower sleeve and sew your lower sleeve on. Okay, do the same thing to the other sleeve and then give it a press with your iron. So now let's move on to preparing the back. There are 2 backs you can sew. I'm sewing the back that has the vertical line through the center. So if you're sewing the back version with the yoke, take the back yoke, which is the upper back, and sew it to the lower back, and there'll be a double notch to match. For this version, you'll have a long center piece that you've cut on the fold, and then you'll have 2 pieces that are long as well, and you cut 1 pair, so you cut one out like this and you cut one out like that. Part way down the long straight edge there'll be double notches that we need to match as we go. So I'm taking the left back as I wear it right side up and making sure the top is at the top of both pieces. I'm going to place that to the center back piece, right sides together, and I'm going to overlock that down. Now take the other side back, place it right side together to the center panel, and overlock that one into place. Now go to your iron and give that a press before you move on. It's a good idea to press it so the seams are facing towards the centre back. So let's sew the shoulders. Place the back right side up and the front right side down and match the shoulder seams and overlock across. And then come on over and do the other shoulder. Okay, so now we get to sew the sleeves in, and this is the same for the inset sleeve or the other sleeve, the plain sleeve. So here is the shoulder seam we've just sewn. Take one of your sleeves and place it right sides together. Find the underarm point here, and we're going to overlock that in, matching the notch in the center to the shoulder seam as we go. And then repeat that on the other side. So now we're going to do the underarms and side seams. So come to the wrist area and fold your garment right sides together. And we're going to overlock up the underarm. Now when you overlock up, we want to make sure that if you've got the insert version, that all of those seams are sitting on top of each other when we sew them, just so we get a nice transition effect. So now we're transitioning through to the side seam. There's a notch to match as you go down. Okay, so now we're approaching the hemline. You'll see there are these little tags. That's actually where we're going to sew the hem up like that. So when we overlock them, we've got to try and straighten them out as much as we can. So just match them together and straighten them like this and try and sew in a straight line. So now we want to repeat that on the other arm. I'll just skip through that part. Right, so let's sew the cuff in. Take one of the cuffs that you prepared earlier, and it's right side out, and just pop that inside the sleeve wrist area so that we have right sides together. And what we want to do is match those 3 seams, and then directly opposite the seam there's notches, and we want to make sure notches all match. So all you need to do is overlock those 3 layers together and stretch the cuff to fit. Now if you're sewing the wristband view, the written instructions are in the construction sequence, but you'll sew it on exactly the same way. The only difference is it might be a little bit more difficult to stretch it because of the elastic in there. And just make sure when you're overlocking that you don't catch the elastic. Alright, so check your cuff is all looking fine, and then do the same on the other side. So now is a really good time to sew on the hood. Take your garment and make sure it's inside out, so it's right sides inside with the back at the back and the front at the front. And take the hood that you prepared earlier. You may or may not have your draw cords here. If you have put them in, just make sure that you keep them out of the way when you sew. So pop that hood into the neckline. And let's overlock it into place. So the centre back of the hood has the seam, and that seam is going to match to the double notch in the centre back of your garment. Oh, excuse me, I'll just pop some pins in so we know where we are. Directly opposite that, between the 2 buttonholes on the raw seam, there's a notch, and that's our centre front, and that matches to the notch at the centre front of our garment. Here. And as we come towards either side of the centre back, you'll find a notch which will match to the shoulder seam. And when you overlock those in, just make sure the shoulder seams are facing towards the back of the garment. There we are. So all you need to do now is overlock that into place, and just if there's any ease, make sure that is all eased out between those base points. So it's a good idea to not start in the centre back because you see it when you're wearing it. Just start to one side or other of a shoulder seam, and remember to take out your pins if you're using them. Do not want to sew over a pin. And if you're like me and you have tack stitched those 2 layers of the hood in, you'll find this really quite straightforward. So as I said, the only thing you really need to worry about is make sure those draw cords are out of the way. They're pretty bulky, so you'll feel them if they're there. So now we're going to move on to the last part, which is to sew our hems. This is a curve. It has a minimal hem allowance of 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. These tags at the side seam were so that you can get this nice corner transition like so. You may find it easy to press this before you stitch. See how you go. I'm just going to overlock and plain stitch it. And I'll just trim off some of that excess tag as I go with my overlocker. Right, so now I'm going to sew the hems on. I'm going to sew them from the right side so I can control what I'm doing because of the curve. Now if you really struggle with getting a nice transition at the side seam, what you can do is sew the hem first and then sew the side seams afterwards. You'll end up with a bit of a tag here, but as long as you tuck up your overlocking into the seam and stitch it down or secure it whichever way you want to, that's fine. You know, really with sewing it's whatever works for you and whatever you're happy with. There's no hard and fast rules. And certainly what I'm showing you is just only suggestions. If it doesn't work for you, you sew it the way you need to. So I'm going to start at a side seam here. And as I mentioned before, we have a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Because of this curve, if you press it and then just control the ease as you go, you shouldn't have any bowing. This finish is going to be very dependent on the fabric you choose. You may need hem tape, I'm not sure. You could always reduce the seam allowance, that sometimes helps too. Well, that's it. We are finished. Go ahead and give your garment a really good press. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also join my Facebook pattern discussion group where you'll be able to get notification of new pattern releases and sales. And thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon for my next sew-along video.